We're at that point in the session where budgets are being unveiled. Senate Republicans have released the first two-year operating budget of the session. So let's talk about that. What are your thoughts about this budget?
Sure. Well, the Senate budget that's been proposed essentially makes education the number one priority, which is something we've been talking about for several years down here. We had a title that was called Fund Education First, and it's obvious with this budget that it actually does that. Just to give you some historical perspective, since 2011, we've actually doubled the amount of money going into K-12 education. For the first time, actually since 1983, I believe it is, 50% of the budget is actually going to be related to K-12. That's been a long time since we've seen those numbers as far as a percentage-wise go towards basic education, but it's huge. You know, the other thing too about their budget is it does protect something that's important to me, and that's related to taking care of the most vulnerable, and especially those that have mental health issues, by putting about $250 million over the next couple of years into our mental health system to make sure that those folks are taken care of. You know, when it comes to significant investments in protecting foster kids, we have extended family that has been in the foster system. We've had a lot of foster children, and I know in talking to a lot of folks around the state of Washington, that's a huge issue for them. So we deal with that population. We also deal with folks with developmental disabilities. And then a big issue that's kind of had some national attention is the use of deadly force from our police officers. We have included in the budget that was proposed by the Senate yesterday extra training to deal specifically with the use of deadly force. So with that and many other issues, I think that they've covered a gamut, but here's the key to it. With all the extra spending, with all the increases in funding for education, mental illness and whatnot, there's no major tax increases involved. They have actually produced a budget that lives within its means. And I think that's important to the taxpayers here. And while at the same time, they've also left the rainy day fund alone, which would protect us in case we do see an economic sway or an emergency in the future. It's also a stable, large fund that we've got available to deal with those emergencies we might be faced with.
House Democrats plan to release their budget very soon. We hear it may be dependent upon major tax increases. Do you have some concerns about that?
Well, yeah, and it's disturbing because what we're seeing right now is without doing anything, without raising taxes, we're seeing approximately $3 billion new dollars coming in from taxpayers already. Since I started here in 2003, the budget's doubled. You know, it took from 1889 to 2003 to get to $22 billion. And here we are in the low $40 billion range here just in the last 15 years. That's a lot of money that's already coming in. We do not have a revenue issue, we have a spending problem. And what this budget does is without doing anything, we're seeing 13% increase in revenue coming into the state. There's no need to raise taxes. The taxpayers are being taxed at a level right now that's teetering, especially in areas outside of the Seattle, Bellevue metropolitan areas, where that's probably the only place that the economy is really booming. But you get into my district, into the 39th district, East Snohomish and Skagit County, the unemployment ratios are still way higher than the national average, and those are the people that are going to be impacted terribly if we follow through with the governor's plan for $6 billion in tax increases.
What's the next step in this process?
Well, what we're going to be looking at now is you've got both budgets being introduced by the House and the Senate through their respective committees. After those are passed out of their respective bodies, the Senate and the House, then we get into conference mode, and that's when we get down to the nitty-gritty of dealing with the details. You've always heard the saying, the devil's in the details. Well, that's what that conference is going to be about. It gives us, though, the time to really get through those details that are important to the taxpayers around the state of Washington and come up with a product that at the end of the day, most of the citizens of the state can really appreciate. And until then, we're going to be duking it out a little bit to make sure that our constituents and folks around the state of Washington are going to be served properly and that we'll be good stewards of their dollars.